Hi. Thanks very much for coming. I just wanted to gather a few of us around the table. As you know, I'm really interested in teenagers, and I think one of the things I'm most interested in is how it changes us as people and as parents. So, as it were, if you had one silo, which was our teenagers and what's happening to them, I'm kind of really focused as well on what happens to us. So it's great that you're all here, and maybe everybody just say hi and who they are. So
Hi, I'm Miranda, and I have two almost teenagers, one who's 14 and one who's 11.
that's it. Yeah,
I'm Kirkland, and I have one 16-year-old and one 19-year-old. So they're at the later end of teenage.
sure.
Hi, I'm Holly, and I've got four children. The eldest is 21, so a little bit out of the teenage, but still sort of. Then a 19-year-old girl, a 17-year-old boy, and a 12-year-old boy who's coming into the teenage world.
Fantastic. And as you know, I've got five, and I've kind of shepherded them through adolescence. I'm sort of slightly at the other side, but not completely. And it's actually interesting how the boundaries at both ends are blurring. Sort of younger children are becoming teenagers earlier, and older teenagers are kind of staying teenagers longer. So I think we all have something to bring to the party. One of the things I'm interested in is this idea of change, but in a positive direction. But maybe that's because I'm interested in positive psychology and what makes for good mental health. And I suppose not denying that it can be very, very difficult raising adolescents. I think it's led to a lot of psychological growth of my own, which is why I call the book The Gift of Teenagers, because it's about this idea that going through difficult times is kind of what teaches us. And I just wondered what you guys felt in terms of maybe anything positive that's come out of it, or how you feel you've kind of grown or are growing, because it's ongoing, right? Hasn't suddenly stopped. Anybody want to jump in or open chat? Or maybe you feel you're not growing. That's okay too.
Well, there's something there, isn't there? Because my children are getting taller.
Yeah.
And that's a really interesting thing to get your head around because it changes the dynamic. Not only are
Yeah.
they not little children anymore that you're in charge of, they're growing up. But
Yes.
they're suddenly bigger than you. So it's just a shift in dynamics, which is fascinating, which I kind of think is empowering, even though you think that you're sort of getting smaller, there is a sense of empowerment that you're on more of an equal level.
Yes.
And therefore got
and
more
it's
to
not
teach
such a
them.
sort of hierarchy, maybe.
Yeah, that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting because you've got two boys, right?
I've got two boys, and it's interesting because I love teenagers. They're my favorite sweet spot. And I find toddlers and babies a lot more difficult. And I find teenagers fascinating because they're so full of life and mood swings and interest. And they're really, you can start to see them becoming their own people. And to me, that's just incredibly moving. And they're interesting, and they're not, I find they're not jaded yet. And they're still there's this beautiful innocence about them, and yet they're older than you think they are, but they're younger than you think they are as well. So it's an interesting place. And I love the name of your book, Rachel, because the gift, I mean, they really are a gift. And personally, my 16-year-old, he's the most joyful, happy kid I think I've ever met. And he tells me, he's like, Mom, you worry too much. Like, stop worrying all the time, just chill. And to me, that's a gift because it's like, wow, I've got this little psychotherapist in my midst, who's telling me what to do and how to feel. And so I'm blown away by teenagers and their friends. I love their friends. I find them all just really, really interesting. And still that right combination of innocence, not jaded, but really interesting, curious, and developing as people.
So has that back to you? Has that elicited that same spirit of curiosity and a kind of lack of jadedness? They've almost been a mirror to allow you to find that in yourself.
I think that's a really good point because they've changed me. I mean, I worry about everything. I'm very anxious, and having them sort of say, "Wow, this is all great. Like, this is a new experience. It's so exciting." And why are you so worried and anxious? And let's try this. it's helped me. I mean, it really has helped me. And I thought, you do take everything so seriously. Like, stop taking everything so seriously. And I mean, I'm now listening to especially my youngest, but the oldest as well, thinking, wow, I wish I could be more like them. So it really has shifted the balance in terms of our dynamic, and me as the parent. Like, they actually have more wisdom than I do, a lot of the time, not always, but
Yeah. I like that, because I'm sure you've all come across the Jonathan Haidt book called The Anxious Generation. Which is nominally about teenagers. And obviously there are anxious teenagers, but it seems to me, having spent 5 years talking to parents and teenagers and people in the field, actually quite a lot of the time it's us parents who are so anxious.
Yes.
I don't know if that resonates.
Totally.
But you always strike me as very calm, Holly, but maybe I've got that wrong.
No, I am calm, but you definitely get checked by your teenagers, and they'll say to you, "Oh, why are you so stressed about that? You don't need to be." Or they'll come up behind me, my 17-year-old, who's so zen, and will sort of like give me a massage on my shoulders, go, "It doesn't matter if that's burnt in the oven, we'll just make another one." Or, they're always coming up with ways to make you feel calm, which is good. And sometimes like, oh, it's still really annoying because I can't do this. But
maybe they're more in touch with their mental health. I mean, we've seen a revolution, certainly, as a psychologist or somebody involved with mental health. I mean, it has become much more commonplace. Maybe they've grown up with concepts that we've had to kind of slightly battle to learn. Maybe some of this, I know they do some of this stuff in schools. I don't know, sometimes I think they're ahead of the game.
But I think they also don't like feeling stressed, and there's a lot of talk about it. They're stressed, my friend's always stressed, they've got this, or my family's stressed, so they want to be not like that, so they don't want the parents to be like that. They want it to sort of calm place to be, especially when they're at home, I think.
I love the idea that they're teaching us how to self-moderate and regulate. Both of you said that about how they catch you up. So they are full of opinions, and full of ideas and full of feedback, which can swing both ways, positive and negative. But it does catch you a little bit.
It really
and help you self-regulate.
I think you've nailed it, that element of surprise. You sometimes have to unlearn what your expectations are. And one of the things I felt strongly about doing the book was that the narrative had got far too negative.
Yes,
and it's come up a bit with this adolescence film. I don't know if you've watched it.
Yes.
But this idea of toxic masculinity and young men being very misogynistic. And obviously there is a problem, but I did want to slightly kind of correct some of that. Well, correct sounds really judgy, but sort of maybe put a different approach, that there was a lot of positive there. And maybe that was something I had to unlearn. I don't know if there's any other thought, what your preconceptions were, because there's just such a strong feeling that it's such a dark time.
Yes.
And that's very reinforced by the media. It's very reinforced by so many opinion leaders and the anxious generation who are saying, it's catastrophic for teenagers.
Yes.
And I mean, I'm the first one in my mental health conference. I have a lot of features on how catastrophic it is for teenagers at the moment. But I love the fact that you're putting more of a positive spin on it, because I actually think, to your point, there's so much more awareness and education around mental health. My kids are so much more, I call them kids, they're teenagers, but they're so much more aware of their mental health, of their nervous system regulation, of, self-care, self-coping mechanisms than I ever was. And so, yes, there is a huge downside with all these digital devices and the technology and the social media. But the upside, and I'll say, well, where did you learn about this? And they're like, TikTok. And so there are upsides, and I think we focus too much on the downsides. And I think it's really important to have a more positive look at, what are the good things, and what is the difference between teenagers nowadays and teenagers before. And certainly in my day, when we didn't have phones and we didn't have all this information and internet, etc., we had no clue, or at least I had no clue about mental health. And they're so aware and so equipped in some ways. And so I think that's a real positive.
And you'll know about this, Miranda, from your clinical psychology work, but one thing that I really felt I learned through this process was this idea that when you have a narrative, you're looking for evidence to fill that narrative. So once you have a very negative narrative and you go into a lot of fear, that this is going to be a terrible period, there's going to be nothing but trouble, then you start to look for evidence that that's the case, and you disregard anything else that doesn't fit your story. And in addition, there's a lot of right wrong around. So you want to be right. So once you have a kind of fixed mindset that there's nothing but problems, there's nothing but all these anxious teenagers, you only look for that story. And I was just wondering if any of you have any sort of practical things that you have learnt that have helped you sort of grow, that sort of gifts that they've given you in terms of how to maybe look at things differently, or even how to communicate differently, or how to relate to other people differently. That being an example of how it sort of changed me, about changing this negative, let's look at everything in a negative way. Are there any things that just, you feel that you learnt going along that you would...
Still learning.
Still learning, yeah, that's true.
Still learning. I really love that, though, because we do look for evidence that confirms what we believe in, and dismiss the other evidence. But we also look out for threat. And because there is such a story around how difficult it is bringing up teenagers, your threat system's ready to go. And being the sort of person that I am, is I like to resolve issues too. And I am really learning that I can't resolve it for them. I call it the Bob the Builder approach, It's I used to think I could fix it, and I still want to fix it, but I can't. So learning that, to let go a little of that control.
I like that. So you've unlearned the Bob the Builder approach.
I'm unlearning the Bob the Builder approach.
I so sympathise. I think I'd been trying to be a fixer.
Yeah, but I think that's because when they're younger, that's your job, is to sort of fix everything and make sure everything's all right for them. And then they become teenagers and they need to learn how to do it themselves. You can kind of give them some advice, but it's you can't fix all their problems. And I think that's something.
I found that hard to learn. But you
It's
can't
hard.
go to the psychological gym for them. But we've got a little psychological gym running here. So that's great. Thank you so much.